Hi, I'm Scott Beck, President of Beck's.
And I'm Sonny Beck, CEO of Beck's, and we want to welcome you to our virtual 2022 PFR Insight meetings. One of the questions we hear all the time is, why does Beck spend so much time, energy, and resources researching products and practices that don't necessarily benefit us? And I can tell you, as a family-owned company, and being farmers ourselves, we for generations now, we understand the value of research, and we love to do things that give us answers and help us hone in on key insights that will help all farmers improve their profitability.
For sure. For 2022, we're looking at high cost, limited input supply market, which means farmers will need to find sound ways to invest their dollars to ensure a return this season. We've got some great content focused today on helping you make the most profitable and impactful decisions for every dollar you invest this season. Our team of experts will be highlighting PFR Proven data, years of industry experience, and current supply trends to help you develop a plan to achieve superior weed control, higher yields, and increased return on your investment.
So with that, let's get this meeting started, and we hope you enjoy it.
Good morning and welcome to Beck's 2022 PFR Insight Meetings. We're excited to have you join us this morning. Grab a cup of coffee, sit down, and join us to listen to the great content we've got to share with you today. I'm Jim Schwartz, Director of Research Agronomy and PFR, and I want to start off with introductions. To my right, Steve Gauck. Steve is our Regional Agronomy Manager for the Eastern Region. To his right is John Skinner. John is a Regional Agronomy Manager for the Central Region. To his right, Jason Gayheimer. Jason is the PFR manager based here in Atlanta. And to his right is Nate Furley. Nate is the regional agronomy manager for the West Northwest. So today you're going to hear a lot about multi-location data. So I wanted to walk you through a little bit about where those locations are at in the U.S. We're also excited to announce the opening of our newest location in Goner, Nebraska. That'll give us 7 company-owned locations across the Midwest. In addition, we'll be showing you data that comes from 3 northern locations that are part of our cooperator network as well. Now, when you look at the data that we're going to show you today, you're going to see some yield numbers, and you're not going to see great big numbers. I want to walk you through a little bit about why that might be. Number one, the way we test is very unique. So what makes it unique? First of all, when we test our locations, our plots tend to be 300 to 500 feet long, replicated 3 to 5 times, and then we replicate at 3 to 5 locations. So when you think about that, that's a lot of data, and so you don't typically see large yield differences when you look at PFR data. We also use field scale equipment, not research plots, research combines and research planters, bigger scale, field scale equipment to do our studies. You're also going to hear a couple words like PFR Proven in a PFR Proven practice or product. So a PFR Proven practice is something that we've tested a minimum of 3 years, and when we compare against other practices, it's the most profitable practice. As it relates to a PFR Proven product, that's something that we've tested, and over the course of 3 years at multi-locations, that product or practice, in this case a product, has a positive yield response each and every year, and then averages a positive return over the course of those 3 years. So today we're going to talk a little bit about investing money to make money, but what you're going to hear today from the guys is some shorter 10-minute segments. But in addition, we'll have posted on our website deep dives where the guys go into much more detail about the topics that they're going to discuss today. So don't hesitate to go. If you want to learn more about any one of these conversations, go to the website and dig into one of the deep dives. So earlier I talked about investing money to make money for profits. So let's start off with Nate Furley. Nate's going to talk about some of the small additions that lead to big profits. Nate, take it away.
Thanks, Jim. When evaluating practical farm research each year, I tend to look for some of those small additions that can add big profits. Those small additions come in many different shapes and sizes. Might be a small input cost, might be a small use rate, might be a small time investment, but also might be just a small nutritional need like sulfur. Thinking of sulfur, this picture has a lot of irony to it because the green movement and these solar panels that are going up all over the place really are the reason that we see such a strong response to sulfur. We're not getting as much from the atmosphere anymore. But the reason I put this up there is really to raise a question, and that's why are these solar panels dark in color? why are they black or why are they blue? Same reason that when walking beans in the 90s, I would wear a white t-shirt as opposed to a black t-shirt. That black t-shirt or darker colors absorb more sunlight. And when I think of sulfur, I think about that addition to the plant pigment to get it darker, to absorb more sunlight, helping that photosynthesis process. And sulfur, we kind of relate it now to corn, but thinking about soybeans, we know sunlight drives yield. What can we do to improve that sunlight interaction and absorption of that plant? And sulfur is one of those keys. So how much sulfur do we need? When we look at this chart, we're going to look at 240 bushel corn and 80 bushel soybeans. We only need about 36 pounds for a 240 bushel corn crop. And as I said earlier, less from the atmosphere, but we're still getting about 3 pounds to the acre. Organic matter. Looking at a 3% example, we're going to give about 4 pounds per percent of organic matter. So we're going to get 12 there. So on a 240 bushel crop, we're still needing to apply about 20 pounds. It's not that much, but it's that small addition for a big profit. On soybeans, 28 pounds required, looking at that 3 atmospheric pounds per acre, plus that 12 from our organic matter from our natural sources, we're still needing about that 10 to 15 pounds of sulfur to get that 80 bushel crop on soybeans. But what stood out to me that was really interesting from our 2021 Practical Farm Research data was our new study where we looked at what's the right rate and what's the right time to apply it on corn. And it helped develop these ratios, that nitrogen to sulfur ratio that was applied. And what stood out was that we saw a hybrid response, potentially a new equation to figuring out how much sulfur we need in our corn. Let's look at soybeans. We already have that PFR Proven 2x2x2 system on that planter. We're going to use that planter to plant soybeans. What can I apply through that delivery system to increase ROI? So looking at the study of the 2x2x2 starter fertilizer study, although 30 units of nitrogen in the form of UAN was the highest yield in ROI, that 2 gallons of sulfur, thiosol, wasn't too far behind. And so a small addition to increase our profits utilizing sulfur. Let's look at sugar. Sugar I look at as that small investment, that low cost investment into higher profits. We've been testing sugar through Practical Farm Research for the last 10 years, and we've seen a handful of products become PFR proven. New to the list, and why we're looking at this again, was Syntos FA. And so you look at these sugar products and you think, 2.2 bushels, 1.1 bushels, again, small, but the cost of these products isn't that much. We're ranging anywhere from $3 to $6 or $7 an acre. And so PFR proven sugar products, it really comes down to, what is that use rate that fits in your program and when are we going to be applying it? I do ask this question though, what herbicides are you using in 2022? A study that we started this last year is a stress mitigation study looking at that FlexStar application. Do we have the liberty that we want to spray or we're so comfortable spraying? We think about chemical availability. We might have to go back to some of these Cobras or FlexStars. And so when we look at that, we know we see that bronzing. And what does that yield impact really have? And so some of these products like Mitigate Plus and StimTide are designed to help that plant mitigate the stress. Well, farmers reached out and said, hey, I've used sugar and that helped, so we added it to the study. And lo and behold, in our multi-location data this year, that sugar application gave us the highest yield and highest ROI, a $3 to $4 investment per acre, giving us a $30 ROI. Sugar being that small input cost for big profits. Probably my most favorite is Farm Server. And I think of Farm Server from a time investment standpoint. And so we all know time is money. What if we invest a little bit of time into Farm Server? What kind of output can we get? And so we've got our data collected through whatever platform we're using, and we have our planning maps, our application maps, our yield maps. Take a little bit of time to upload that information into Farm Server and let the tools within Farm Server go to work for you. New is our growth stage model. So this, entering our planting maps, or if you don't have that capability, simply enter in a planting date, a relative maturity, and a target moisture to activate our growth stage model. That growth stage model going to work for us, identifying ahead of when these important growth stages are. We're going to hear a lot about important growth stages on both corn and soybeans, on how it can increase our profits, but how do we know we're at that right stage? Using VT as an example on corn, we know that fungicide is a profitable application at that time. 10 days prior, we may get a notification saying, hey, your corn is approaching that VT, and here's some helpful tips from practical farm research that can help you improve that profitability. One of those maybe being carrier rate or that time of day. But the key thing is really identifying that growth stage. And when I think about that key, I think of soybeans. It can be often hard to identify when that R3 or most profitable growth stage is. And so this tool can help us manage many different fields and many different planting dates without having to scout every day or every other day to make sure we're hitting that right growth stage. A small application rate for a big profit would be in our talc replacement study. So think of that seed. Think of that seed being the start of that plant and putting something on there that's going to be beneficial year-round. And so we think of nutrients. Oftentimes we're broadcasting these nutrients, expecting them in maybe a 6-inch area to absorb those nutrients in there. Well, what if we can take some of those micronutrients or those biological products, apply them to the seed, and use the seed to deliver? Now, we're already doing this with seed treatments, but what about using these talc replacement products? So talc, designed to lubricate that row unit, increase the efficiency of singulation, and also the row delivery, helping in our center fill planters get that seed evenly distributed out to the rows. We can use that application to apply some more micronutrients or to apply some biologicals. So our new study in 2021 was taking a look at some of those products, and the key to take away from this is that most of the products that we tested in comparison to that standard 80-20 talc gave us a positive yield and a positive ROI on corn, and the same is true in soybeans. So we're looking forward to testing more around that talc replacement in the future. Not so much a small addition for big profits, but worth noting is new to PFR this year, corn silage. What's worth noting is that the corn silage research we're doing within Practical Farm Research is utilizing the same protocols that we're executing for our grain, which means that we're going 300 to 500 feet. We're replicating 3 to 5 times. So we're getting a really unique data set in corn silage that's different than what you might see from the industry, but it's focusing on agronomics. It's focusing on agronomy-driven studies. So some of those studies we looked at this year, microbial activation, using some of these biological products to increase our silage, not just tons and moisture, but also that quality. How does it make us more money in milk or in beef pounds per acre? Population, plant growth regulators, and then harvest height. If I harvest more of that plant, is it going to affect my quality versus giving us tons? So check out your 2021 PFR book for more data, and look forward to things to come in 2022 with our corn silage. Now, for maybe not such a small investment, or one of our larger ones for big profits, let's talk nitrogen with Jim Schwartz.
Thanks, Nate. Nate's right. Nitrogen is a very large investment every year, and as we all know, that investment is going up this year because the prices of nitrogen have gone through the roof over the last few months. So one of the questions we get a lot right now is, can I do anything about that? Are there things I can do to manage that input cost and be more efficient with nitrogen? Well, let's start with the basics. When we think about nitrogen, how much nitrogen does it take to grow a bushel of corn? Well, we know that it takes around 1 to 1.1 pounds of nitrogen to grow a bushel of corn. And what that means is when we measure the nitrogen that's in the grain and in the plant, it takes around a pound or 1.1 pounds. Now, in the past, when nitrogen was cheap, I think a lot of growers looked at that and said, if I want to grow 250 bushel corn, I want to use 250 to 275 pounds of nitrogen. But when that input goes up, as it has recently, we really need to think about, can I be more efficient? Do I need to apply that 1 to 1.1 pounds? And in many cases, the answer is no, because we need to take into account all the sources of nitrogen that's available. Now, this statement may shock you just a little bit, but I want to throw this out there and say applied nitrogen has very little correlation to final yield. Applied nitrogen has very little correlation to final yield. That may surprise you, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. Here's a chart from University of Illinois, and every blue dot represents a field. On the x-axis, they have nitrogen rates, and on the y-axis, they have yields. And you can look, we've got nitrogen rates in that 125 pounds applied range, and yet you can see we have a lot of yields above that 200 bushel per acre range. Well, how can that be? Where is that nitrogen coming from? And are there things I can do on my farm to make that work for me? And there are. We can talk about things like rates, source, and when I talk about source, I'm talking about your soil and maybe even your previous crop, placement, and timing. Well, let's start with rate. Over the years, we've done a lot of work at Practical Farm Research to understand what is the economic optimum nitrogen rate. And by the way, that rate varies from every farm and it changes every single year. But what I want you to look at is we have three different prices here, 50 cents, 75 cents, and $1 per pound of nitrogen. When you look at it, you can see that when nitrogen was 50 cents a pound, that economic optimum nitrogen rate was around 200 pounds. But when it's $1, it drops off about 24 pounds. And that's the economic optimum nitrogen rate. That's where that return on investment starts dropping off. But the other thing I want you to think about is to get this dot, there were a lot of dots up here and a lot of dots down here. And so every year is different, every soil is different. This year was a little bit different. So this is 2021 multi-location data. And what I want you to focus on is that dark green bar. So when we averaged all our locations together, what we learned was that we grew 253 bushel corn on 160 pounds of nitrogen. Some were lower than that. Some may have been a little bit higher than that. But we had a very efficient year because we had mineralization of our soil organic matter that released nitrogen into that rooting profile. This is 2016 data from University of Illinois. Now, University of Illinois, where they did this study in Monmouth, they had very deep, dark prairie soils, 4.5+% organic matter soils. So it's not like the rest of the world. But it's just a really interesting point to understand that where they applied no nitrogen in their unfertilized check in June, they found 167 pounds of nitrogen. Now again, every soil is different and every year is different, but it's just a good indicator that your soils can provide nitrogen. Here's one field over many different years, and you can see every year is a little bit different. But what I want you to take away from this is that fertilizer needs are not really related to yield level, but are more specific to the soil and the year itself. This is a guideline that was just released from Purdue this past October. I just want to share this. I thought it was really interesting. Some soils provide as little as 25% of the crop nitrogen requirements. Others can provide in excess of 50% of the crop nitrogen demand. Again, that varies from year, varies depending on your rotation, but what I want you to think through is, can I start counting on my soil mineralization to provide some nitrogen for my crop? And I think the answer is yes. The other thing I want you to think about is that nitrogen credit, that previous crop. In the past, I think we looked at the soybean nitrogen credit and said, it's a bonus, I'll just take it. Maybe when nitrogen prices are $1 a pound, maybe we need to start thinking about that is a part of my nitrogen program. On a silt loam, most years you can take conservatively a 40 to 50 pound credit. And then on a coarse textured or sandy soil, maybe you could take a 20 to 30 pound credit. But that is a real number, and you may think about taking that this year in this high nitrogen environment we're in. How about placement? Does placement matter? It does. We've done a lot of work over the years, and we found when we switched from placing nitrogen on one side of the row to just taking that same 30 pounds and placing it on both sides of the row, we gained 6-7 bushel. Some locations, some years it was more, some a little bit less. But simply placing that nitrogen on both sides of the row provided a benefit. One of the things we did was we went and laid a board across the row, and so you can see the corn rows here, and then we started sampling every 3 inches. And I think it's really interesting. When you look at our other forms of application where we put it pretty much in the middle of the row, that's where the nitrogen is. But look what happens when we switch to that 2x2x2 system. Now we're picking up that nitrogen closer to the plant. And we know that about 70% of a corn's roots, that corn plant's roots are right within 7 inches of the row. And we can see when we switched to that 2x2x2 system, we started moving that nitrogen closer to the plant roots, and maybe we are more efficient. Let's talk about anhydrous. A lot of folks still use anhydrous. When we think about spring applied anhydrous, does it matter how deep I plant it and how deep I apply it and when I apply it? And the answer is yes. So we did a study over multiple years where we used a 8-inch application depth and a 4-inch application depth within a week of planting and then after a week of planting for the most part. And we have really interesting results. When you summarize it all down, on the left of your screen you see the 8-inch application depth, and then on the right is the 4-inch application depth. And what you can learn is that if you have to decide between timing and depth of placement is the key. This picture is a great illustration. On the top is the 4-inch depth. within 6 days of planting, after 6 days of planting. On the bottom is 8-inch depth. And again, you can see that if you have to decide, if you know that you're going to plant within a week of application, make sure you get that at the proper depth. How about timing? Now, I know a lot of you were able to get anhydrous this past fall, and you put it on because, number one, it was available and it was more economical. But we know over many, many years that if you can split apply, you're going to increase your profitability. These are 4 different split applications compared to all up front. And we know that applying in that split application method does improve our profitability. It also allows us to gather more information and better understanding about things like, have I lost more nitrogen this year? Or am I mineralizing a lot of nitrogen? And maybe I can change and fluctuate my rates based on that information. Last, one of the topics we get a lot of questions on is these microbial nitrogen products. Can I utilize them to change my rates, to be more efficient and effective with my rates? We've tested Source, Invita, and Pivot Bio or Pivot Bio Proven over the last 2 years. Now, Source and Invita we've tested 2 years, Pivot Bio Proven we've tested 1. We wanted to share those results with you because it's a really common question right now. So we tested 190 units and 165. And what you can see is there were times, and I would say more often at the 165 unit rate, we seem to get a little better response. But when you look at the ROI for all 3 of these products, here's Source, here's Invita, and then here's Pivot Bio Proven. And again, this was only 1 year of data. You can see that for the most part, it's close. And again, at that lower rate, sometimes we see that benefit, but we don't see the return on investment over the last couple of years. Now, that could mean that we've had really good mineralization years, and maybe the rate needs to be lower. I'm not exactly sure. There's something there, but I think we need to continue to do research to learn a little bit more. So how do we maximize our nitrogen investment? First of all, account for some portion of all the potential sources. If you're in a corn bean rotation, maybe you take that credit. Maybe you do this year, start thinking about how much nitrogen credit can I take from the mineralization of my soil organic matter. Maximize other tools such as timing, placement, stabilizers. Make sure that you get the correct form in the right time and the needed supply. Corn plant takes up most of its nitrogen in that nitrate form. Make sure you get it when that plant needs it into your soil profile. And lastly, I'm just going to say, this isn't going to be the last time the fertilizer prices spike. So use this year as a learning year. Try something different on your farm. Try a different method. Try a different timing. Try some different rates to see if you can learn. Lastly, I want to summarize with this. My dad told me this when I was a kid. He said, you can't save your way to prosperity. So what I want to recommend is don't just cut rates to cut rates. That may be a disastrous decision. We have no idea what the growing season is going to be like. Utilize this year to learn, to try different things, and make sure you're doing what you can to manage your nitrogen efficiently to increase your profitability. With that, I'm going to have John Skinner come up and talk to us about spraying for profit on corn.
Thanks, Jim. Spraying for profit on corn provides us quite a few unique opportunities to our operations. Our sprayer is one of the few pieces of equipment that make multiple passes across the same acre each year, opening up a whole plethora of opportunities to apply different products and do different practices. So when we look at the profitable sprayer pass on the corn side, we want to build off what we found last year in our profitable fungicide pass. The profitable fungicide pass was built on 4 key components: the right product, targeting fungicides that have active ingredients that are targeting the diseases in your field and that have multiple modes of action, targeting the right growth stage of your crop. Our practical farm research studies have showed that VT-R1 is the correct growth stage to get the highest ROI out of a fungicide pass on corn. We also wanted to target early in the day. When those corn plants had dew on the leaves, that dew acted as an increased carrier rate, gave more time and better coverage of that fungicide to get into the plant, and the proper carrier rate. When we were using a ground-applied rig, we were running 15 gallons to the acre, and that was the rate that was giving us the highest ROI. So with that said, we wanted to take a chance to expand on that this year and kind of set the foundation for any spray pass we make and how we can make it more profitable by doing things slightly different or potentially adding different products to the mix. The first thing I want to talk about is water conditioning. When we look at our water sources on farm, they vary drastically. You could be getting it out of a pond, a well, city water, an irrigation ditch, all sorts of different places, and that's going to affect the way in which your foliar nutrition products, your herbicides, and your fungicides interact when they're mixed with that water. When we looked at our water conditioning studies, we had 2 products that became PFR proven in corn this year. Brand Indicate 5 on corn, as well as a product called Choice Trio on corn. They vary in the rates they use, but when we tested them with foliar nutrition products, over the past 3 years, they both provided us with positive yield gains and a positive ROI. So the question becomes, when should I use one of these water conditioners? And if I'm running a foliar nutrition product or a fungicide, I'm going to look into one of these products. What they do is they reduce the pH of your spray water, making the half-life of your products be more extended and not go through a process called alkaline hydrolysis, which can tie up some of those active ingredients and make them less effective. So the data for 2021 was pretty interesting in corn. We didn't see a huge response out of Indicate 5 or Choice Trio, but they did provide us with a little over $2 to the acre ROI. Now, that may not seem like a lot, but it's already a pass we're making with the foliar nutrition product, so we don't have added application costs. These products are very cheap to use, so any ROI we can get is going to be a great benefit to us. 2021 was a little different than the other years we studied. If we look at the 3-year data on Indicate 5 and Choice Trio, they both had significant return on investments. Indicate 5, $9.76 to the acre and becoming PFR proven, and Choice Trio, almost $5 to the acre advantage. So when we're looking at making a spray application of foliar nutrition products or fungicides, I'm going to recommend looking at one of these water conditioning products to help reduce the pH of your spray water. The next topic I want to touch on with this profitable sprayer pass is going to be fungicide products. Now, we knew that was a base for our profitable fungicide pass, and this year we added 2 new PFR proven fungicides. We added a product called Lucento from FMC and a product called Miravis Neo from Syngenta. Again, both of these products have multiple modes of action that are effective against the diseases we're looking to control, and both of these products have been applied over time at that VTR1 growth stage. So 2 new PFR proven products. Let's look at the yield advantages over the 3-year period to get them PFR proven. Lucento averaging 9.4 bushel to the acre advantage, and Miravis Neo right at 11 bushel to the acre advantage. So very promising yield results out of those 2 products. When we look at the ROI for those 2 products over 3 years, $24 and $19 respectively with Miravis and Lucento. So very good ROI, very good yield enhancement for these 2 new PFR proven products. Another little twist on fungicide, and some of this is going to be a profitable spray, and some of it is just more education around a new fungicide and a new way to apply fungicides for our corn crop. And that way is using a product called Xyway LFR. Xyway is a fungicide that you apply in furrow at the time of planting, and they tout that it has season-long control of diseases like gray leaf spot and northern corn leaf blight. Their label also indicates that they have control of fusarium stalk rot and crown rot along with anthracnose stalk rot. That could be a big player because in 2021 we saw those diseases not only affect yield across the corn belt as well as affect standability and late season plant health. So if we can apply a product at planting that can help us cure some of those crown rots and fusarium stalk rots, that's only going to benefit us at the end of the year. So how's this product work? Oftentimes we talk about fungicides not being totally mobile in the plant. They usually just stay where they land. They're not very systemic. That's not the case for Xyway. The graph you see on the screen is data from Michigan State University, and it's very unique. Draw your attention to the blue bar there, and any red line that extends right of the blue bar is a concentration level that is adequate for controlling foliar diseases in corn. And you can see at the ear leaf, the leaf above it, the leaf below it, all the way through that plant, it has a very adequate concentration of Xyway in that leaf tissue to control diseases. The other thing you'll see is the roots have a huge concentration of this active ingredient as well, meaning they're going to be healthier season long to help with some of those standability issues. So what's the dollars and cents look like on this product? Well, when we tested it in our timing and placement study, we did it in three different ways actually. We tested Xyway by itself, 15.2 ounces in furrow. We also tested it 2 by 2 by 2. You can see those at the bottom two treatments. They did have a slight reduction in ROI with the 2 by 2 by 2 and a slight increase in ROI with the in-furrow application. The other way we tested it was a half rate of Xyway in furrow followed by a foliar application of Lucento, and that actually provided us with the highest ROI this year. Now, this is first year studies with Xyway. There's still a lot to learn here, but I do think it has a lot of merit for early season disease control and some of those easier to control diseases like gray leaf spot season long. We took some great pictures at our Kentucky Practical Farm Research site. You can see on the left-hand side of your screen the control with no fungicide whatsoever versus the Xyway LFR in-furrow and other foliar applications. Now the in-furrow Xyway LFR wasn't nearly as clean as some of the foliar applications, but it did have a considerable advantage over the no fungicide. So more to come on that when we look deeper into Xyway in the following years. Another timing aspect, as well as a product, is Veltima. Veltima is a new product brought to market 2 years ago, and they touted that you could have full season control by applying this product as early as V10. So operations that didn't have a high clearance machine or had lots of acres to cover and needed to get started earlier, this could be an option for you. What we found out of our practical farm research data was that V10, although it provided a positive yield gain and ROI, it did not have as high ROI as the R1 application. So my recommendation on Veltima is going to be still to spray it in that R1, R2 time frame to get the biggest bang for your buck. And it wasn't just a 2021 ROI for that. We've seen it for 2 years with that product. So $49 advantage when using Veltima at R1 versus only a $2 advantage when spraying it at V10. The final thing I want to touch on is fungicides additives. We're already going to be making that fungicide pass out there to improve our ROI. Are there things we can add to the tank to get more ROI out of those passes? And the short answer is yes. But I really want to focus on products that utilize the micronutrient boron. The main source of boron for our corn plants comes from the soil. It's mineralized through organic matter, but it also is very mobile in the soil, so there's certain environmental opportunities that make boron unavailable. You can also see that boron comes into the plant later in the season. It's important for pollen viability, silk tube elongation, tip fill on your corn. So a lot of things that promote pollination and grain fill. So let's look at a few products that we tested at PFR in 2021. A product called Brant Smart B Mo, that's boron and molybdenum, and you can see it rose to the top with a $16 an acre advantage this year. There were other products like Harvest Mate Urea More that we tested. Again, almost $10 to the acre advantage with that. Both of those products have a considerable amount of boron in them as well as other micronutrients to help promote some of that yield. Brant Smart BMO has only been tested for 2 years, not yet becoming PFR proven, but it has been very consistent with its results and ROI. The one that did become PFR proven for 2021 was the Harvest More Urea Mate, with over $13 to the acre over 3-year average ROI. So, when I'm making a fungicide pass, this is somewhere I would recommend that you look at. I want to look at these boron products. Some of these blends that have other micronutrients in them, as well as boron, or a product like Boron Plus that have been PFR proven for 2 years now to add to your fungicide tank. With that said, I'll kick it over to Steve Gauk. He's going to touch on making a profitable pass with your sprayer in soybeans.
Thanks, John. So John just got done talking about corn. Now we're going to make this transition into soybeans. And when I think about spraying soybeans, for a lot of us, it's more reactionary. I've got some weed escapes. I've got some diseases. The neighbors are spraying something. So when we do that reactionary, maybe we're not doing the right things to be profitable. So today we're going to talk about, hey, if I'm making that pass across, how do I be the most profitable in soybeans? The first thing really we want to talk about is timing. And through PFR studies, you've heard a lot about timing in corn and soybeans. So for some of you, this is a review. But for 7 years, multi-location data, you'll see we see over a $17 return to spraying soybeans at R3. And I get a lot of comments sometimes in beans. They say, well, I've sprayed fungicide on soybeans. I just didn't see the response. Well, look at R2 and R4. You'll see a negative return on investment. So that shows that, hey, we may have still increased yield, but it was not profitable. It also shows how crucial that timing at R3 is. Why? Well, approximately 70% of a soybean's yield comes from nodes 6 through 13. Well, at R3, nodes 6 through 13 are exposed. And ultimately, fungicides don't translocate very well through a plant, but they translocate well through the trifoliates. So if we can get a fungicide application on the trifoliates that are feeding nodes 6 through 13, we are going to maximize our yield potential. The other big question I get is, what is R3? So when we look at a soybean plant, you take the top 4 nodes, and in those 4 nodes, you're going to look for all of them being fully developed trifoliates. So ultimately, those top leaves on the trifoliates, the edges, aren't touching anymore. And we're looking for that pod that's 3/16 of an inch long. So top 4 nodes, a pod 3/16 of an inch long. That is the beginning of R3. The next question I always get is, well, how long does the R3 growth stage last? Well, that depends on the weather. So growing degree days, good conditions, poor conditions, moisture, things like that. But on average, that lasts about 10 days. Well, some of you are going, I can't spray my entire farm in 10 days. But think about this. You're planting different maturities. You also have different planting dates. So you're actually widening that window on your farm for the amount of time the entire farm is in R3. So more opportunity to spray and actually more time to spray. The other question we get in terms of timing on soybeans kind of goes back to some studies we've done in corn. Should I do multiple applications? Should I do later? Should I do early? So you'll see here we're looking at our control. We're looking at an R3 application. We did an R2 and an R4. And then we did an R3 followed by an R5. So really looking at R5 is, can we make that plant a little healthier during grain fill and extend grain fill period? Well, in all those scenarios, we increased yield. But again, it goes back to the R3 timing was our most profitable. And when we think of a year like this with higher input cost, we've got to go after the profitability. That's still R3. Well, a few of you say, well, in corn, John just got talking about, maybe I can do some things earlier in the season with fungicide. So we tried that on soybeans. Here you'll see we made a V4 application, R3, and then we did an early V4 application followed by R3. Well, again, all 3 of them actually increased yield, but the profitability came back to that R3 application. So remember, look at those top 4 nodes, look for a pod that's 3/16 of an inch long. That's the beginning of R3, time to make your fungicide application. Now, time of day has also been a hot topic. When, during the day, should we be spraying our fungicides or foliar nutrition? Ultimately, we've seen that with a dew on the leaves is our most effective time to spray fungicides and foliar nutrition. The stomatas on that leaf are open. That dew actually acts as a carrier. So as a fungicide hits that leaf, it spreads more evenly. The stomatas help pull it into the plant. We get more material more efficiently into that plant. Ultimately, again, looking at that 160 gallons of carrier out of that fungicide. But when we think about this time of day, we look at 8 a.m. versus 3 p.m., it's still profitable to spray fungicide. But there's over a $5 advantage to spraying in the morning. So let's make all our spray passes profitable and more effective. Spray our fungicides and our foliar nutrition in the morning when there's dew on the leaves. Switch to herbicides in the afternoon. They like it hot and they like it dry. They're more effective. Then we can make all of our spray passes more effective and more profitable. Now we go back to carrier rate. We talked about the advantage of that with the dew. What about upping our gallons of water? Now, a lot of us don't like to do that, right? Boy, I'm gonna have to stop more. It takes more time to fill up. I can't cover as many acres per day. And I understand that. But if we look at 3 years worth of data, we look at this 20 gallon per acre is PFR proven. So we think about coverage. More water, we can cover that plant more effectively. In the PFR trials, when we go out and walk them, you can compare the 15 and the 20 gallon, look down in the canopy, and you'll see there is less disease deeper in the canopy of that 20 gallons. 20 gallons of water moves product deeper in the canopy, gets better coverage, therefore returns yield of $8 an acre. Okay, for your time and those few extra fill-ups in a day for an extra $8 an acre. Water doesn't cost much. Now I want to jump into new PFR proven soybean fungicides. We look through, we have a great list of PFR proven fungicides. These are just a few, but I wanted to highlight the new ones. Lucento and Miravis Neo, from a soybean standpoint, both PFR proven. We also have Miravis Top, that's PFR proven just for soybeans. And really Miravis Top is targeting frog eye leaf spot. So we get Indiana and kind of go south where frog eye is more of a concern year in and year out. We see a huge return out of that product. Now the one thing I really want to point out though is when you look at the modes of action on this sheet, every PFR proven fungicide has multiple modes of action. So for me, what's PFR proven is use multiple modes of action and the timing. VT on the corn, R3 on the soybeans. Now we're going to jump into water conditioning. And really, have you ever considered your water, how your water source affects your spray solution? It could be with pesticides, fungicides, foliar nutrition. Water actually makes up the highest percentage of solution that touches your plants. And just like John mentioned earlier, that can change. If you get water from the main farm versus grandma's, there's a lot of different properties. How hard is it? What is the pH? So that changes the effectiveness of what you're spraying. So in PFR, we decided to do some studies on that. Here you'll see we had water only. In our PFR farms, really it averages about 7.4, the pH. We added Versamax AC, which is a PFR proven product, actually raises that pH. When we get down here, we're looking at Brand Indicate 5, Choice Trio, and the standard spray grade AMS. And when you look at that, they're all lowering that pH, and they're helping spread that product out along the leaf surface and helping it get into the plant better. But the pink color really jumps out. So the Brand Indicate 5 changes to pink when you put in the amount that reaches the right pH. So as your pH water sources change, you keep dumping in that product until it turns pink. Where the other ones, you've got to check your pH, add some more, check your pH. So it does simplify things. But how did this work in our PFR studies? So here you'll see we're looking at the Versamax AC, raised the pH to 8, Brand Indicate 5 and the Choice Trio lowered it to 5. The spray grade AMS lowered it a little bit, we're still at 7, but they all increased yield. So that tells me we have a pH concern and a water hardness concern that they're both fixing. Now ultimately in soybeans, the Brand Indicate 5 has become PFR proven. So we're making this pass, we can make our products work better, more effectively, we can get a bushel out of that or better. It's an easy way to increase your profits. I want to jump now to fungicide additives, or adjuvants, sorry. As we're coming across those, we're looking at this new Brant Super 7. It's a multifunctional penetrating surfactant. It helps reduce spray drift by improving your spray pattern. It also reduces your tank pH and really helps with buffering that product, helping it get in the plant better. And we look here at 3-year multi-location data of a $14 return makes it PFR proven. So ultimately it's something I think we should be taking a look at, again, as we're making that pass, a way to add some money as we go across. So to wrap up, we're going to talk about that profitable fungicide pass in soybeans. Again, it's the right product. Target diseases that are present in your field. Right? That's ultimately the goal. Select products with multiple modes of action. Target that right growth stage. R3 is when we want to spray those soybeans. Time of day, early in the morning with dew on the leaves, and use a high carrier rate, really targeting that 20 gallons per acre. At this time, we're going to let Jason Gayheimer come up and talk about everybody's favorite thing in PFR, equipment.
Thanks, Steve. Let's talk about planter setup. So I'm going to hit real quick on downforce and high-speed systems. But for additional information on these topics, as well as row cleaners and disc openers, feel free to watch the deep dive on planter attachments. So let's start with downforce. Downforce is my number 2 upgrade to a planter behind aftermarket closing wheels. Reason being is we want to get good uniform depth, have good ground contact for uniform emergence, as well as stabilize that row unit to maximize the dollars we spend on other attachments. And so the questions we get is manual or automated systems, spring, hydraulic, pneumatic. And so my go-to is always going to be hydraulic, and it's always going to be that whether you're planting 5 mile an hour or 10 mile an hour, and it's going to be fully automated. So here's our results showing that and proving that data out. 3-year multi-location data on corn showing tremendous gains for a fully automated downforce system compared to static pressures of 50, 125, and 250. And those static pressures are also utilizing a hydraulic cylinder. So if you think about if we would compare this to springs at static pressures, we would have even higher gains or expect to see higher gains. And also remember, we're testing these in nice uniform plots. And so when doing that, if we would do this field scale where there is more variability, there's again a chance for even higher gains with a fully automated system, ensuring we have the right amount of pressure down at all times as conditions change throughout a field. So looking at stand counts, we have a little bit of a gain in stand counts when it comes to automated downforce. These aren't tremendous stand count gains, but like I mentioned before, a lot of the reason for the results we see is a more uniform emergence because we're holding that row unit right where it needs to be, we're stabilizing it, we have great spacing due to that, and just that overall better emergence, better plant vigor. You can see that here as we have the control automated downforce. We have a more uniform stand, a more vigorous stand compared to that 50-pound manual setting. Once again, another great picture of the 125 versus the fully automated. And so if you're trying to pick and guess which static pressure to be at throughout the field, more often than wrong, you're gonna pick wrong somewhere in that field. And so automated systems are very important, especially in field scale with that variability. So let's look at acres to pay off. This is where we want to represent equipment in terms of how we can pay them off. And so what we have is we've got different row unit planters here. We've got 12, 16, and 24 row planter. Dark green bars are 450, gray are 550, and light green are 650 bushel corn. So I like to pick the middle of the road and talk about the 16 row planter at 550 corn, a little under 1,200 acres to pay that investment off. So soybeans, once again, we're seeing an advantage for fully automated Delta Force. The thing I like to talk about our soybean research is we use RTK, we go straight, we split the stalk rows if it's no-till data. So if you're doing a planting operation where you're going out in the field and you're planting at an angle, no-till across some previous stalks, the results that you could expect from a fully automated downforce system is going to be much greater than what you see here on the screen. Stand counts, again, good increase on stands when it comes to automated Delta Force compared to those static pressures, but overall, we're seeing that increase due to the more uniform stand and being able to hold that depth. Acres to pay off on Delta Force here, once again, 12, 16, 24 row planter, middle of the road with $12 soybeans, just under 1,500 acres. I like to also mention if you do have a split row planter, say you've got a 40-foot split row planter, you're going to want to double what you see on the screen in terms of how many acres it'll take to pay off that investment. So let's switch to high-speed systems. Beck's has a very unique opportunity that we were presented with in 2021 to be able to test all 3 of the commercially available high-speed technologies on the market: Ag Leader SureSpeed, Precision Planting Speed Tube, and John Deere ExactEmerge. And so here's the final stand counts on those trials we conducted. I do like to mention these were conducted in different states. Planting populations were slightly different. So Speed Tube data was planted at 34,000, the ExactEmerge was 35,000, and SureSpeed was at 34,000. So what this really shows is statistically we aren't losing stand as we're going faster because we've got represented on the screen 5 mile an hour, 7.5, and 10 mile an hour. And as you can see, as we go faster, we aren't statistically losing stand. In some cases, we're gaining stand. And so really we just want to prove out that each one of these systems are doing what each company says it's capable of doing. And so here on the singulation, along with what you just saw with final stand counts, we're proving that. And we're not trying to necessarily compare them against each other, but we just want to make sure they all work as advertised. And so Speed Tube, ExactEmerge, SureSpeed, at the different speeds we tested, 97+% singulation across the board here. And that's phenomenal because this is not monitor singulation data. This is ground truth, going out counting plants of what's up and out of the ground singulation and taking those measurements. And so we go out and we dig. If there's a skip and we find a seed, we do not count that against the planter itself because it's not its fault, right? So ground truth singulation of 97% higher, absolutely phenomenal. This is 3-year multi-location data for SpeedTube. We're going to work through a quick example. We're going to use SpeedTube because we have the most data on it, and it's actually PFR proven for us with 3-year multi-location data. So when we take our standard seed tube at 5 mile an hour, put SpeedTube on, then we go the same 5 mile an hour, 7.5, and 10 mile an hour, and you can see we actually gained a little yield at 5. We didn't lose anything at 7.5, and we lost just a slight bit of yield at 10 mile an hour. Okay, so let's work through an example of a 16-row at 5 mile an hour. We can get about 17 acres per hour. We throw SpeedTube option on there and we go up to 7.5. We can get 25 acres per hour planted, 47% more acres per hour. Let's work through an example of a 4,000 acre grower, 2,000 acres corn, 2,000 acres of soybeans. It takes about 19.6 days to plant that crop for a 16-row at 5 mile an hour. For the 7.5 mile an hour planter, 13.3. And when I say days, we factored in 12 hours per day of actual planting time. We got to factor in some multi-location planting date research here as well. This is 21 years of data. So it shows our optimum time to plant corn is mid to late April, and we start to statistically losing yield as time goes on after that. Okay, so we're going to look at 3 specific windows when we work through this example: mid to late April, mid to late May, and then June to finish up. We're going to start with 200 bushel corn. We're going to lose those percentages based off our planting date results as time goes on. We're going to do the same thing with soybeans. Optimum time to plant soybeans, same time you're planting corn. Mid to late April, we start losing yield from there. We're going to use 65 bushel soybeans as our starting point for this as well, and then it drops off just like the corn does, but it's based off of those percentages you just saw in the soybean planting date. Okay, so here we go. First planting date window, the 5 mile an hour planter. We're able to get about 1,000 acres planted of the corn. Finished up in that second window there in late May, switched over to beans, got a little bit of the soybeans planted late May, finished the rest and the majority of the soybeans in June with the 5 mile an hour planter. The 7.5 mile an hour planter was going to be able to plant around 1,500 acres of corn in that first optimum window, finish corn, switch over, and plant the majority of the beans in the second window, still there in May, and then just finish some of the soybeans in June. So how does this pencil out? When you add it all together, these can be big numbers. Okay, so if let's look at just corn only. So if we're using that planter that we added SpeedTube onto for just corn, and we do have another bean planter, that penciled out to over $34,000 return that 1 year in this type of scenario. But if you're using that same planter for both crops, not over $97,000 in this example. And I'm not going to go out here and say this is what you're going to get, but this is real data. This is a real example of what could happen. So there are big gains to be able to have with being able to plant faster, as long as you can continue to get the same result as what you do at 5 mile an hour. So with that, we're going to transition to our question and answer session, and we want to know, what questions do you have? So go ahead at this time and start inserting your questions in the comment section below, and we'll get them answered. We've got other resources available here at Beck's. Obviously, we have the PFR book. So if you need a PFR book, contact your local Beck's representative. A lot of good information there about PFR Proven products, all the multi-location data, and much more. We also have availability of studies online, as well as PDF of the book online at our website. Other resources on herbicide. Herbicide's a big topic right now with availability and what programs are we going to run. So we have a soybean herbicide program guide and a weed management resource guide. Very valuable throughout here, especially this year. So check that out. You can download it online, or once again, contact your local Beck's representative. Lastly, we want to know how we did. So please take your phone out, hover over the screen, scan in that QR code, and fill out the survey for us, because like I said, we want to know how we did. So let us know, and let us know what we can do better in the future.
5, 3, 2.
Thanks, Jason. Appreciate it. Hey, before we go on and start the Q&A session, one thing I failed to do when I started the meeting off was introduce our newest regional agronomy manager. So we've got a new one for the Kansas, Nebraska area. His name's Scott Dickey. Scott just recently joined the team, and we didn't feel like it was fair to Scott to try to prepare and do a presentation on short notice, but we're really excited to have Scott join the team and look for him in future meetings here when we do the virtual PFR meetings. So we got questions coming in, so let's start off. John, I'm going to start this one with you. Regarding the water conditioning studies, Are you reducing the biocarbonates in the water? And then the second question is, have you used reverse osmosis water as a water source when spraying? So, John?
Sure. With the water conditioning study, when we reduce the pH of the water, we're not naturally going to reduce the bicarbonate, of the water. As far as reverse osmosis in PFR, no, we haven't tried that yet. I do have some experience with guys on their own operations using reverse osmosis system, and what they've done is reduce the need for some of these water conditioning agents, and had some better herbicide efficacy out there with using reverse osmosis, but at PFR we haven't tested
And Steve, you even mentioned that you've had some guys do that as well, right?
Yeah, kind of the same thing. We've had some guys that have put in some systems with reverse osmosis, and just like John said, they've reduced their need for water conditioning. And ultimately, they feel like it's really, they've paid for the system by the improved herbicide activity and the no need for additives.
Jason and I were talking, it's actually one of the things on my whiteboard, one of my whiteboards in my office to consider doing for future studies. I think it's something we ought to investigate. Let's see, fungicide use, we'll do John again, because I think this was you did corn fungicides. If your crop is healthy, using light effectively, Brix levels are over 14, then why all the fungicide use?
Well, fungicide use has other properties as opposed to just to controlling the fungus in the plant, with ethylene suppression and kernel depth and grain fill and lengthening that period of time. We've still seen great results from an ROI standpoint on doing it. So even though it may not be necessary for disease control, we're still seeing the ROI out of it, which obviously we're not doing this for practice. We want to make money. So if we can improve our ROI, it's something we're going to bring to the table.
Yep. Nate, anything?
Well,
yep.
I was just say, I don't, how many of us really know what our Brix levels in our plants are? It's not a standard test that we're doing on our operation. I think if you go back to 2019 in PFR, we did Brix testing in association with our sugar studies, and the highest we saw in soybeans was 6. Didn't matter what sugar product we applied versus the control. 6 was that ceiling. So there would warrant probably the need for a fungicide to improve that plant health.
The other thing I would say is, you know what? Try it. If I had those kinds of levels and I wasn't convinced a fungicide would pay, I'd still try that. I mean, that's a beautiful thing. Try some swaths and see what happens. So.
It also goes back. It's like herbicide, right? We say the best way to prevent a weed is to not let it emerge. And so just because its plant's healthy today doesn't mean it's going to be healthy a week or two from now. So if we get fungicide that can have some preventative action there, a lot of times it pays. Plus, for the reasons John said, right? It goes back to it does more than just potentially prevent or help cure diseases. So.
Jason, let's stay with you. The next question. You've tested 3 different high-speed systems. You got a favorite?
We get this question a lot. I wouldn't say we have a favorite. I think there's a lot of things to consider when you're going to these systems. The reason we wanted to test all 3 was just to ensure they are as advertised, right? You can plant at higher speeds and not sacrifice a lot of yield, or hopefully really any yield. And I think we've shown that in the 3 years we've tested Speed Tube, and the 1 year testing was very positive with ExactEmerge and SureSpeed. The things to consider is, in my mind, what do you currently have on your planter? What's the cost involved to get to each of these systems? And then also, what do you want to do down the road with your planter? And will putting any one of these systems on there keep you from adding certain components down the road that you think you'd be interested in? So you really got to think a lot of things through when you're adding these systems. So I would say we don't have a favorite. They all work. The end result's pretty similar. And so it just goes back to what else do you want to do, cost involved, who do you want to work with, who do you trust, and who do you have that relationship with as well. So a lot of factors there for me to consider. So I would say it is going to depend on my current planter setup, what I have, and then what I want to do going forward.
Speaking of depends, the next question is there a way to know how much my nitrogen I can receive from mineralization? And really the answer is no, or it depends, not depends, right? It depends.
The agronomist answer.
Exactly. And here's why I would say that. And then you guys jump in and share your thoughts as well. When we think about the high nitrogen costs, I think in the past growers took no account for mineralization, and most soils have an ability to mineralize some level of nitrogen in any one given year. If I had a 3% organic matter soil, personally, I'm going to count on a minimum, if I want to be conservative, 15 to 20 pounds per percent organic matter in any one given year. Now, again, that if I have low pH or it's wet all year or hot and dry all year, it'll be on the low end of those numbers, but I would still think about including that number when I say how much nitrogen do I need to provide to my plant. We always think about that one to one, 1 pound of nitrogen for every bushel, but we can account for other sources. So the other thing I would say is that most crop models really only take 1 acre furrow slice into account. That's 6.7 inches. I think as we've done a better job in incorporating things like cover crops and no-till systems that allow air to get deeper in the soil profile. I also think that we are mineralizing nitrogen deeper than 1 acre furrow slice. So for instance, when we say 15 to 20 pounds per percent organic matter, that's only thinking about 1 acre furrow slice. So I think there's opportunities to consider some of these deeper soils. If you're in Illinois, central Illinois, those prairie soils, Iowa, maybe there's even more to be had, but it's tough to know. But I would, if I had a farm and I had 3 or 4% or 2.5% organic matter soil, I'd be accounting for some level of mineralization. Anybody else? Nate, and then Steve.
I'll speak to the northern climate.
Yep.
And the northern climate, we don't know exactly what that number of nitrogen availability is, but we can put a pretty good gauge together based on what's happening in March. So if our ground is still frozen solid, we got snow cover on top of it through that end of March, then we're not going to have a lot of naturally mineralized nitrogen available for that early season. Some years, though, we start that thawing process the 1st of March, and we can actually be in the ground be in the field putting small grains in the ground in late March. Those typically are the years where we see more available natural nitrogen in the soil just from a longer mineralization before that planting cycle. So I think the gauge is based on, what's the soil activity doing in relevance to when we're planting that corn.
Steve, you were going to comment too.
Yeah, well, I think a couple things really to think about is just like we were talking about with that gauge and understanding, what's going on during the season in terms of, are we having good weather? Are we saturated? Are we dry? But ultimately, Jim, I'd take a step back to a little bit what you said is that nitrogen that has been mineralized in the past, we've been utilizing that. So if we start pulling back nitrogen, in my mind, and make it up for that, we're already using that. So I'd be careful about pulling that nitrogen back and replacing it with the mineralization because you've already been using that throughout your history of your farm.
True, and that is a good point. Well, one thing I would say is what we're also seeing, though, is that we're plateauing our nitrogen levels. Like you look at a lot of our PFR data, I think in many cases we're over-applying, right? I think it's so, because you look at Effingham, we've got, 255 bushel corn with 160 applied. So your caution is real because, my last slide was you're not going to save your way to prosperity, and you have to be careful. I would never counsel anyone to do this broad scale, but try some of these things and see what happens. Good thoughts. Anybody else? All right, next question. If I cannot get a ground rig to spray fungicides, is using an airplane okay? And Jason, we'll talk about this as a PFR study, right? And then John will come to you. What should I consider with carrier rates? So Jason, ground rig versus airplane. Why don't we have any data in PFR?
This one's a really hard one to execute. We've attempted in the past, and something's either went wrong with timing or getting the plane there, or something got sprayed wrong, and we just didn't have confidence. We are really putting a huge effort this year to getting multiple locations of ground versus aerial executed this growing season. So really hopeful we will have some data to show this time next year, but it's just been one of those elusive studies for us, I guess, to this point.
And I would also add, if there's somebody on here that wants to try it, we're open to having a conversation.
We will work with you to help execute and do the things needed. So,
absolutely. Yeah. John, what about carrier rates?
The more the merrier. So on ground rig, I want to be in that 15 gallon per acre range, and if I can get an airplane to spray more than 2 gallons, I want to try and do it, even if it costs that extra 50 cents or $1. So if we can get more carrier rate out of those airplanes, I would push for it.
So you would, and I know the question, probably part of this question is, well, if you talk about carrier rates being key to fungicide pass, and an airplane does 2 to 3, and we can do 15 to 20. You would expect, I know that's the question probably, is should I expect higher yields? And we don't have any way to answer that today, I guess, really.
So John, what's the advantage of, Is it worth paying a guy extra with the airplane to try to get him to spray all your stuff in the morning and the neighbors in the afternoon?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. That's kind of why we talk about the ground rig, because you control your application window if you have that ground rig. And doing it in the morning with dew on the leaves, we've shown that that's been profitable every time. So I would definitely lean towards a ground rig if you can, and increase that carry rate and do it in the morning, like you said.
Well, John, a lot of fungicide questions, so we'll go back to you with this one, and anybody else wants to add in. If only choosing to apply fungicide one time during the season, what would you choose? Would you do Xyway as a standalone? Why not? What do you think?
At this point, I'm going to say no. I wouldn't do it as a standalone, because in a lot of areas we're talking about diseases like southern rust, we're talking about diseases like tar spot that aren't on Xyway's label. And what we're starting to find out with some of those is our highest response when those diseases are present are later in the season, R2, R3, R4 time frame. So as a single, only getting to do one fungicide during the season, I'm not going to go with Xyway right now. Now, we've only tested it 1 year, and that could change as it becomes more popular in the market. But I'm going to go with a mixed mode of action foliar fungicide if I only get one shot on corn right now.
Would you do Xyway, and let's just lay it, even though he said or she said one, would you do a Xyway followed by something at R2 or R3?
I definitely would. Yeah. That'd probably be my favorite approach right now for a season-long control. And the thing that I really like about the Xyway is the anthracnose and fusarium stalk rot control that you can get early in the season, because we really don't have a great option for controlling those when you get that early crown rot infection. So if we can have Xyway there and it's showing efficacy against those, and it's got some decent control to get us through that tassel time frame, and then we can come back with a foliar, I think we'll see some pretty good benefits. And we saw some of those benefits this year with our PFR data.
Yeah, good. Anybody else? Any
I think that may apply a little bit, though, on your soil types and your situation, right? Sure. I agree. Like that Xyway up front for crown rot. You know, when I get southern Indiana, I get in Ohio on our wet soils, absolutely, right? It's a big deal. But I think some more on your sands and stuff, the more heat, the more pressure late, I would stick with the full shot later. Yeah. So I think a little bit of it varies where you're at and what you are. But I agree that the 2-shot for crown rot is definitely the best.
And to your point, even cultural practices, if I'm a no-tiller and the first guy to plant in the township, and it's, that may tip me one way. So, yeah. Nate, how accurate is Farm Server as it relates to early planted beans versus later planted beans? Can it really nail that growth model?
I'd assume the question is on the growth model within Farm Server, and we tested it last year. We ground truthed this through most of our agronomy staff, PFR locations, and we ground proofed anywhere from our early April planted beans all the way into our June planted beans, and it was close. I mean, it's not to the hour. I mean, you can't go out there and say it's exactly to this, but I would say out of the thousands of acres that we ground truthed it on, it's within a day or two, but that's a lot more accurate than scouting every 5 days or once per week or looking at it at 60 miles an hour driving down the highway. So the model surprised us all in how accurate it was. So it didn't matter on that planting date. The key is just make sure that you enter the planting date into the model. If you go into the model and just enter, well, this is my average planting date for all my fields, then that's where we lose accuracy in the model. So it does take a little time invested into to make sure you're putting the right data in.
All right, Steve, spraying fungicides on soybeans. Do your ROI numbers represent generic or branded products?
So in PFR, most of our studies are using a branded product. So if you have the opportunity to find a product that's equivalent in a generic or a better price option, your ROI will increase. So the thing I kind of like about using that branded product, if it works at that price point, it's going to work for you.
So are all generics the same as the branded products? Are there differences in those products, and can they provide different benefits or advantages?
No, absolutely. Everyone's different. So you got to know your label. You got to understand your retailer you're buying from or your supplier, and help them work through what is this, how do I compare apples to apples? Because you really do have to do that.
There's a lot of inert materials in these products too that aren't posted on the label. So you might think, here's the active ingredient, here's a percentage that's the same or close from a generic to a branded, but there's a lot of things that change or different in the inert materials.
Yeah, they aren't created equal, and that's kind of why we've stuck with branded for the most part in PFR. Because if we go down the path of testing some, we can test generics forever and never get them tested right, and so it's kind of been for what Steve said. If we can test the higher price branded and get good ROIs, there's probably opportunities to get some generics in and get similar results. But like I said, be careful, and they're not all created equally, so you got to be careful there.
Yeah, it's good points, guys. So I was able to get all my nitrogen applied in the fall. I know, John, we were talking that a lot of guys, they were able to get their nitrogen in the fall or last summer, and they're like, man, if I can get it and the price is reasonable, I'm going to put it on. And the question is, so does that mean I'm going to lose yield? My answer is no, not necessarily. I mean, we did some studies last year where when we did fall compared to spring, and there was virtually no yield difference. However, it could also be yes. It depends on what happens next year, right? What's your opinion?
I agree with you. If I had to answer this question, I'd say I have no idea.
Right. Yeah.
If we thaw out early and get a bunch of rainfall and displace that nitrogen, yes, it's going to affect yield. Or if you're on coarser than normal soils, low organic matters, low CECs, and you physically can't hold it all, but you were able to front load it because of a price option or a fall conditions, yeah, you'll probably see a yield impact. If it's like 2018 in central northern Illinois, no. I mean, you'll never see a yield reduction from a year like that with decent rainfall, good temperatures, high mineralization. So I don't know. Obviously, we see a lot of ROI from split applied nitrogen.
Right.
We see a lot of the ability to maybe reduce your total nitrogen input from split applying nitrogen. So with those two things in mind, I mean, that would be my preferred method. But if you got it on for $600 or $700 a ton on anhydrous, you're probably going to shake out pretty good in the ROI side of things this year.
Yeah. Anybody else? Any comment, Nate?
You made a good point. You forego the opportunity to split your nitrogen when all that investment is done up front, especially with higher nitrogen costs. But I would say don't just rule out an application of nitrogen in season, because for the reasons of heavy rain, low mineralization, another 40 pounds in season might be the difference of 50, 60 bushels.
For sure.
Be cognizant of that. Just because nitrogen prices are high, don't say I can't spend any more money on nitrogen and do an in-season application.
But back to you cannot save your way to prosperity. You just can't. And that's, I always like to tell people, I can tell folks exactly how much nitrogen they should have used, when they should have used it, what form, and where they should have stabilized if they're willing to wait to September, right? Because then I know all the answers. That's the hard part about nitrogen. So, John, if equipment and time were not factors, and then we'll do this on soybeans too, Steve. What would be the best way to apply fungicide on corn? What is that perfect pass? What's that look like?
All right. I'm going to get a ground rig, high clearance ground rig. I'm going to do 15 gallon to the acre of water. My preferred, because of where I live and the area I cover, my preferred product is going to be a Muravis Neo or like a Delaro Complete, something that's got 3 modes of action, has a SDHI component in it. I want to target the diseases that are actually out there, and those do a pretty good job of broad spectrum control. So 15 gallon the acre, multi-mode of action, ground rig. I'm going to do it at 8 o'clock in the morning, maybe a little earlier, and I'm probably going to throw in some sort of boron supplement with it at the time, because we're starting to see a lot of soil test boron levels low, plant tissue testing boron low. It's a relatively inexpensive product. PFR's got really good data on it, and then in commercial fields where we've been running boron for a couple years, we're seeing even better results than what we're getting out of PFR studies. So,
Jason,
I'm gonna be looking at considering some adjuvants too. Something like Brant Super 7 has been really good for us, and so throwing that in, just like throwing the boron in as you're making that trip, and an adjuvant just like the Brant Super 7 or others similar can be a good bang for your buck as well.
And I'm going to R1. I forgot to say that.
Yep.
I'll go at R1.
Yep.
How about the soybean pass?
Those guys steal a little bit of my thunder. Again, back to that ground rig. From that standpoint, obviously, the 20 gallon of water in soybeans, right? I really want to soak that bean plant and get it down there. At that R3 timing, I want to really focus in on that 3/16 of a pod in those top 4 nodes. Again, I'm going to spray in the morning. I want a heavy dew on there. I'm going to condition my water. adjuvants, like Jason talked about, multiple modes of action in that fungicide. I want a strobe in there, but I need that Trizol and SDHI for frog eye for in the south. So 3 modes of action is ideal. And on the soybeans too, just like John at that R3 application, I'm going to throw in some boron. That is kind of becoming that next big thing. And we've talked a lot about sulfur. And now let's start targeting boron in that fungicide application.
Jason, first off, are Yetter poly twisters still the best option for aftermarket closing wheels?
I mean, I guess until you take the champion down, it's going to be the champion, right? I guess in the world of looking at our data, it still has the best results for any wheels we've tested for a minimum of 3 years. So, but I'm also not going to say it's the best option every time, everywhere, for every condition. So it's one of the more versatile options, and it's one of the best performing options we've had. But if you're in a heavy clay, all no-till situation, I'm probably going to lead you towards something like the SI finger till wheels, or there's other options. We've had the zippers wheels are great options. They're versatile as well. Copperhead furrow cruisers there. So technically the Yetter poly twisters have been the best for us, and our data shows that, and it is what it is. But I like to talk that through with every situation because it's not the silver bullet every time. And
there is a wrong answer in your mind, right?
Yeah.
What's the wrong answer when it comes to closing wheels?
2 solid rubber closing wheels, or just any wheel set improperly. It's the wrong choice. You can take the Yetter poly twisters, put them on your planter, have them set wrong, and that's a horrible option. So it's not as easy as take these wheels off, put these on either. So
1 solid, 1 spike.
No, absolutely not. So we've learned that 10 years ago when we really started getting deep into closing wheel research, that's kind of what the industry was pushing everyone towards. Hey, put a cast spike on one side and a rubber on the other. Well, after digging and doing a lot of evaluations, yes, it was better than 2 solid rubber closing wheels, but it's not as good as 2 aftermarket wheels paired together, because you're going to get preferential root growth towards one side more often than not, and that's not what you want. So,
anything else?
Well, I'd like to say the manufacturers make these wheels to sell you both of them. And that's the way they're designed. So and tested. So do that. And I think that's a simple recommendation.
Good. Yeah. Well, Steve, we talk a lot about fungicide on soybeans, but how much is it going to delay my soybean harvest?
Yeah, and I think you get that question a lot. And we look back over history and think about early on in the days of fungicide on soybeans, we did see some green stem syndrome. We saw some delays, and I think a few things have changed. One is genetics, right? We've improved genetics. 2 is, I think this whole timing of fungicide and this plant health aspect has helped eliminate some of this green stem syndrome, because maybe we were applying it too late, maybe we were applying it too early. Now we kind of know that timing at R3. In terms of a delay, we are extending that grain fill period. So we're increasing grain size, we're increasing yield. The delays have been very minimal in PFR studies. So in my mind, the addition of the yield, maybe it's 24, maybe it's 36 hours. Sure, there's always those wild cases where it seems to be a few days. For the most part, the delay is well worth the yield increase.
Okay, anybody else?
I don't talk a whole lot about beans, but when I do, I want to keep them as live as long as I can. So if I'm getting delayed harvest on my soybeans, I'm okay with that, because it means I'm still filling out bean size, I'm still filling out bean weight, and going to add the yield.
Would you plant an earlier maturity already?
No, I mean, no. Again, I don't talk about beans a whole lot, but if I'm planting beans, I want to plant the longest season bean for my geography that I can, because they typically carry the most yield in those situations.
No. Okay, this is a very specific one, and we'll ask the question, but it's really hard to understand, a specific situation. But here's the question: opinions on approach prima fungicide on soybeans. Apparently, it cost this grower 6 to 10 bushels per acre in 2021. Thoughts? Anybody?
It seems if you do 6 times, it costs me. Did it? He had a yield loss? Is that the way you read? Or it cost him $60 to the acre?
We need to ask more questions to answer the question.
Yeah. I don't know that
Need
we
to-
have a good
need a
answer.
little-
It's almost
Well,
impossible.
if you can shoot us some more information around that,
Yeah.
we can. If we're on here long enough, we can probably answer that.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I think we need more info.
I think we've heard this before too, where growers say, well, the fungicide cost me because the stems were green. I wasn't able to harvest them, the
Yep.
harvestability of that plant and
Yep.
getting that grain in. So there's some harvest loss associated with that. But I don't know, 6 to 10 seems pretty high for the harvest loss.
Without knowing, it's
Right.
really impossible to. I'm sorry. I wish we could answer that question for you, but I don't know without more information. And please reach out to us or give us some more information or talk to your local agronomist. See if we can help you with that question. So, Jason, I'm going to come back to you real quick. If you were changing someone's planter, what are the two changes? What are the most important changes you would make as far as technology on a planter, and is one more important than the other?
The first thing is aftermarket closing wheels. I always start there. It's the best bang for your buck. It's really consistent to get 2 to 5 bushel on corn. So I'd start there. Then I'm going to move to hydraulic downforce because I want to stabilize the ride. I want to get good, perfect ground contact to keep the right depth at all times, not create too much sidewall compaction. But I like to stabilize that row unit before we start adding other things like upgrading our metering and those things, because I want a nice, smooth ride. And then spend the money in the meter to be able to singulate and space perfectly after that fact. So that's kind of why those two are 1-2 for me pretty consistently, regardless of any situation.
What about an airbag?
Nope, pneumatic's just not fast enough. If you're at pneumatic, invest in hydraulic. It's worth it. The response time from pneumatic to hydraulic is not even close. So you need to be hydraulic to be able to change as you're going through the field and conditions are changing. It can change quick enough, pneumatic cannot. And if you're springs, by all means, invest in hydraulic downforce, please.
All right. You guys talked a lot about boron and the importance of boron. What if I don't have a high clearance rig and I can't spray it in foliar? Are there other ways to apply boron, John?
Yeah, you can, any way you can apply fertility, you can apply boron. So I'll say this. Don't put boron in furrow. Do not put boron in furrow. That'll hurt you, but any other way, if you want to do it 2x2, if you want to side dress it, if you're making that pass, there's quite a few different ways. But it is very
wide drop.
Yep.
very mobile in the soil, so it acts just like your nitrate nitrogen. So if you're applying it early in the season, it could be lost by the time that plant uses it in those reproductive stages. So.
Anybody else? I think we covered it.
Nailed it.
Ooh, well, here's an interesting one. Sap test or tissue test? One better than the other? I can tell you I can't answer that question because I don't have enough information. Anybody else? Nate, you want to tackle that one?
I think if we're referring to like a Brix test or a sugar, the sap is the better one to test for that Brix reading, not just crushing that tissue.
Right.
So go to that, follow that trifoliate to the stem, and that's where we're going to collect for that Brix reading on a soybean. Same would be true for corn, I guess. So,
But there's a lot of this new sap testing technology that is from Netherlands, maybe. I can't remember this coming over, and it's really, John, you were going to
Well, it can give you more of a snapshot of what that plant's been through and what it's estimated to go through. And so it's not like tissue test is that day when you pull it at that time, whereas sap can give you a little bit more of a range of what you're dealing with. Cost-wise, it's going to be, 7 to 10 times as much as a tissue test in most situations. So.
And then what do you do with, what do you do? We've messed with the sap testing a little bit a few years past, and cost was a big concern. Timeliness of it took a long time to get results back compared to tissue sampling. So, you can maybe get a snapshot into the future a little better, but it has typically for us taken longer to get those results. And then, what do we do with those results? What do they mean for us, and how do we be profitable based off of knowing that? Because we got to make up what it cost us in the sample itself. We got to find a way to make it profitable. So.
In an article I read, it said that the tissue test is what's stored in the plant, what nutrients are stored and available for that translocation. The sap is what's available to the plant. So kind of what's available to the plant at that time to be stored for translocation later.
And I think we need to do more benchmarking, right? Understanding. Frankly, I'm not sure we understand tissue testing as well as we probably think we do. And so I think sap testing even more so. Just start benchmarking. I would encourage people, if they want to try it, but don't just a personal opinion, I think it's pretty hard to come to hard, solid conclusions after just 1 year. I think you got to do it over a couple years. And so, anybody else? Can I reduce the gallons of water as a carrier if I spray when there's dew on the leaves? We've actually done this study. Jason, you wanna start here? Remember, we've done this study a couple years.
Yeah. Our hope was, hey, if we saw that we need to increase carrier rate, right? Then we did studies of morning versus afternoon. We saw, hey, there's a pretty decent benefit of spraying when there's dew on the leaves. And then we did the combination study, right? Thinking, oh wow, can we reduce our carrier rate by spraying in the morning and get that same effect as just the higher carrier rate? And that just like 1 + 1 doesn't always equal 2, right? It didn't pan out to be that way when we did the testing. I still think the answer is the high carrier rate and spray as much as you can with dew on the leaves. I don't think my recommendation would not be based off the year or two we did that research that yes, you can do that. That would not be my recommendation.
Doesn't 1 + 1 always equal 2?
Always.
Maybe not 3.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
it's too early, guys. Come on.
Well, and I think really ultimately you think about that, the dew on the leaf helps that fungicide move across that leaf itself, not through the plant. We still got to use your carrier to get that product all the way down in that canopy.
Yeah, it's a good point. Anybody else? Okay, well, we'll do a couple more here. AMS in my spray tank. As a water conditioner, should I give myself a sulfur credit in my fertility plan? Nate, you want to tackle that one?
So a good question, and so thinking about Liberty Link, we're using 3 pounds to the acre, and comparing that to what we're getting in the atmosphere, 3 pounds. But I wouldn't necessarily give ourselves a credit in our fertility plan for that, mainly because that AMS solution is doing something in the water, and we're probably antagonizing some of that sulfur because we're using it as a water conditioner. I think this is a good point to make at this point to say, in our water conditioning tests, we do test other water conditioners versus AMS. In Liberty Link, we still need that AMS. We still need 3 pounds AMS. That is not used as a water conditioner in that application. It's used as an activator for that glufosinate. So, but as it pertains to the fertility plan, I wouldn't give myself a sulfur credit in my fertility plan.
I know we did a study with the different corn hybrids this year, and we used all kinds of different nitrogen to sulfur rates, and it really wasn't. It was pretty hard to peg. So I'm with you. I think my answer is no. Anybody else? We'll do a couple more questions, and I think we'll call it good. So regarding the amount of nitrogen required for a bushel of corn, that 1 to 1.1 that I talked about, do I really need to apply that much? I hate to say this, but the answer is sometimes yes and sometimes no. Here's what we know. We know that if you measure the amount of nitrogen that's in the corn plant and in the grain when we haul it away, that total is 1 to 1.1, give or take, pounds of nitrogen. There are years when you need to apply 1.3, right? There are years when you can apply 0.5 or 0.6, and that's so hard to know. That's why we talk about split applications and things like that. So there's no real way to know. One of the things I mentioned was don't necessarily think that you have to apply 1 for 1. If you split apply, if you stabilize, if you do different practices, you do a 2 by 2 by 2, you may not have to do that. I would not necessarily start my year off. If I had a 3.5% well-drained prairie soil, I don't necessarily think I would apply that. Our data is pretty clear, 190 pounds, Jason, is we're getting easily 250 plus bushel yields. But however, there are some soil types and some years where you may need to go more than 1.1. So anybody else want to clarify or anything?
Well, I think too, right? It talks about how much tile do you have, where's your pH, your lime, your oxygen levels in the soil. You get more mineralization. So on your tighter, wetter soils, it always seems to stay closer to that 1.1, where better drained, how you've managed those soils through the year will have a big effect on that.
Yep, absolutely. Anybody else? Sugar. It's been researched for years. Why has it resurfaced in this discussion and more? Who wants that one?
I'll take the sugar question.
Okay, there you go.
So I think there's 2 really answers to this. Why is it resurfaced? We are looking at it within PFR in a different way this year. In my deep dive, I talk a little bit more about it used as a stress mitigation, using it with FlexStar. So that's one of the reasons it's resurfaced within PFR. But I think the other reason it's resurfaced is we're finally starting to understand the why. And oftentimes in research, we'll see maybe a data increase that's consistent over 3 to even 7 years, but it's the adoption curve. The adoption curve tends to lag even 5 to 7 years. So I think more growers are starting to catch on to it. They're seeing the data. It's a nice addition to a fertility program. So I think that's why it's starting to resurface, is now growers are going, okay, well, I'm going to do this, but why am I going to do this?
It's also the opposite of everything else right now. It's still cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's part of the reason why we typically see returns on sugar, because it's cheap and it doesn't take a lot of corn to pay off for sugar. How cheap is it, Jason? What typically?
I mean, it depends on the product, but I mean, you're putting $1, $2.
Yeah.
I mean, it can be 3.
3 to 4 is about the average for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff we've tested is less than that, but it doesn't take much.
All right, I'm adding sulfur regularly to my corn program. Do I need to be applying it to my soybean program as well? Who talked about sulfur? Nate, you?
I say yes, we still need to be adding it to our soybean crop if it's needed. Again, going to a deep dive, promoting our deep dive videos, but I explored all of our PFR locations as it pertains to organic matter. Some of our locations are close to 5, where we've received enough additional sulfur to take care of our soybean yield needs. And then in our areas like Kentucky, where it was lower, the higher the addition, the higher the yield. So a lot of factors in deciding how much sulfur to apply to that soybean crop, but don't let that 2-year application of sulfur be the fertility program, because it's mobile. We don't know what's going to be left over for that soybean crop. So address that crop, address your fertility needs for the crop that you're intending to plant that year.
Anybody else? And I know, there's some new research from Purdue. It's not so new anymore, but he talks a lot about it. Really, there's a soil type factor that goes into that as well, right, Steve?
Well, there is soil type. We go back to this mineralization, how well drained, and really got to think about sulfur too. Is very mobile in the soil. Mm-hmm. So hopefully that corn crop has taken all that sulfur up you've used, or if we've had heavy rainfalls, maybe we've lost some. So again, it's coming back and adding that sulfur in front of the soybean crop. I think is very important.
All right, we're going to do 1 or 2 more questions, and I think we're going to call it a morning. Well, talk about nitrogen, talk about high prices of nitrogen. This has been a hot topic. So should I try Source or Pivot Bio or Invita or any of those so that I can save money on my nitrogen application? So first of all, a little bit about the products. They all do this a little different way, but we've tested Invita and Source for 2 years and Pivot Bio for 1 year. And our data is really ambiguous here, and we've tried different rates. And for the most part, what our data would say is that we're not necessarily seeing a return on investment with these products. Now, having said that, I personally believe that a lot of these products kind of do what they say if you think about it, how they are originally tested. For instance, when you test in more of a sterile environment, I think they do what they say they will do to a degree. I think what we're learning, however, is that when we expose these things into the environment on a larger scale, for instance, Pivot Bio, the way it works, it puts that nitrogen into the soil zone, right? Well, there's a whole lot of competing biology in that soil zone. A lot can happen to that nitrogen in the soil zone. So even though it may be doing what it says, maybe it's not getting into the plant, or it's not. So I guess my answer to your question is, I would. If you want to try something like that, that's fine. I would certainly not build a program around those just yet. I think we're on the leading edge of these biologicals. I think there's a lot to learn. Again, I'm not going to discourage someone from trying it, but I would not make that a part of my nitrogen program. I wouldn't do that. Anybody else want to?
I'd use them to get more. I think that's where my hope for the biological market is that it can continue to drive our yields up without having to apply more nitrogen than what we're currently doing. So I wouldn't want to see a reduction, because then we're going to end up at the same end goal. So we saved $10, we spent it into the product, and then we made $10 back. So my hope for the biologicals is we can continue to raise that bar, and then as we do that, we'll really get to understand what soils they work, what environments they work. So like you said, Jim, we're just at the very leading edge of this biological.
I share with groups all the time. I don't even know if we know how to test these products yet. How does salt from a starter impact their performance? Does soil pH? I'm not even convinced we know how to test them yet. So let's do 2 more. All right, 2 more. It looks like there's 2 more questions in the queue, so then we'll call it good. Does the talc replacement data change, Nate, if I'm using a center fill versus a box planter?
So the tests we did in PFR were all box planters.
Yep.
I don't think the data changes. However, center fills, the primary reason for the talc or the lubricant on the seed is the seed delivery. Well, John, you and I have had a lot of discussions about some of the products that I personally like the dust product. It's safe for us to handle on the PFR farm. We're constantly handling seed in there, but I know you share a different opinion. I think we share the different opinion because we're using box fills and you're using a center fill. So there again, I think it's the application of what the purpose is. Sure. As it pertains to yield. I mean, we tested the yield because of what those talc replacement products delivered to that seed sphere, to that zone.
John, do you have a different?
That's fair. I think it's going to vary just depending on your situation, what kind of planter you have. So I don't think it should change the data, but there may be some oddities with certain products when you have center fill systems as far as buildup or moisture getting in there and how they react when that happens versus regular talc or graphite. So just some things to consider.
Good. Last question. Nate, well, if you had to pick one way to apply sugar, what's it going to be?
Foliar applied sugar. Timing of that on soybeans, what I've personally seen is that similar to fungicide, R3 application is standing out to be the best. On corn, it's that earlier vegetative application is that single one application use of sugar. Where it goes, I mean, we continue to look at this. Maybe we look at a stack study where we're applying different application timings, but that one single effective is there. So a good fungicide additive.
Anybody, Nate or Jason?
I really just want to say something different, just to battle Nate here on this one. And I'm not going to say he's right. I'm not going to do it. But I'd pick the same thing.
Anybody else? All right.
I agree with Jason.
There you go. Yes. Well, it looks like we've covered all the questions today. We really appreciate you joining us this morning. We've had a great day. I hope that some of the information we brought can have an impact on your farm. I would encourage you to think about one thing you've learned this morning that you might try on your farm and see if it makes a difference. It may or may not, but we would encourage you to think about one thing you heard this morning and try that and see what happens. So for Jason, Nate, John, Steve, myself, thanks for joining us. Have a great day, everybody.